water right over here. If you need to take a phone call, we ask that you please go outside and take it, just to, allow the presentation to keep going. And then also, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. In your goodie bag, you have the survey of the day, just 6 quick questions. Answer those, submit them. If not, you can also do it on your phone, off the QR code. Let's see. And that is all. Let's give a warm welcome to Alexander Smith.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you guys for having me. So my name is Alexander Smith. I will introduce myself in just a second. I want to thank Columbus Senior Center for putting this event on today. This is the last speaking event of today, and I'm going to go over managing everyday stress. So that is my topic with you guys here today. So just a little bit about me. My name is Alexander Smith. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist here in the Central Valley. I also teach, so I'm an adjunct professor at both Fresno State University as well as Clovis Community College. So I teach in the psychology department at Clovis Community, and I also teach in the psychology department at Fresno State University, along with the child and family science department. So I do part-time teaching there. The other half of the time I see patients. So I work in Fresno, servicing the Central Valley. I see adults, I see families, couples, and children. I see about 15 patients a week. So I do that on the side also. Ultimately, my goal as a professional is to really increase the public's knowledge regarding mental health and stress generally, and also the impact of these things on our physical health. And that's really my goal here with you guys today, is to talk a little bit about the concept of stress, what stress looks like in our body, and then also go over and really focus on the coping skills that we can use on an everyday basis to be able to decrease the effects of that stress. So I'm going to start off with giving you guys this analogy. So the analogy here is me giving you guys a glass of water. So I want you to think, I hand you this glass of water, and I tell you, or I ask you, can you hold this glass of water for a few minutes? So you might be thinking to yourself, that's a pretty easy task. I should be able to hold this glass of water. The glass of water isn't that heavy. Maybe it's around 12 ounces. And most of us can carry those 12 ounces no problem. However, the absolute weight of that water doesn't really matter at the end of the day. What if I tell you to hold that glass of water for around 5 minutes? Or I tell you to hold that glass of water for 10 minutes? And then I increase it to an hour. At some point, your arm is going to be very tired from holding that glass of water, and you're going to want to put that glass of water down. On top of this, let's say I add more water to that glass in your hand, and I tell you to hold it for even longer. I want you to think, as a society, we've been taught spilling water is bad, right? We don't want to spill, we don't want to get shaky, but at some point we're going to be really overwhelmed with holding that glass of water. So we're going to want to put that glass of water down. So the analogy here is that stress and anxiety are pretty similar to this glass of water. A little bit of stress and anxiety, just like a little bit of water in that glass, is not a bad thing, right? You can manage that, you can hold that. But if I tell you to increase that stress and anxiety and increase that water, and I tell you to hold that for a longer period of time, you're going to be overwhelmed, and you're going to want to put that water down. So, to be able to really talk about anything, we want to clearly define what we're talking about. So, what is stress? Stress is this really tricky thing because there's no clear-cut definition. If you ask one researcher what stress is, it's going to look very different than when you ask another researcher what stress is. So ultimately, as a collective, we've come up with this definition. Stress is how we react when we feel under pressure or threatened or overwhelmed. This is how we react. It's different from person to person. And stress is different than a stressor. So I want to differentiate those two things. Stress is the reaction to something that makes us feel overwhelmed, and the stressor is the actual event. So I want to clearly differentiate those two things because stress differs from person to person. So something that might stress you out might not stress out somebody else that's in this room. So the stressor doesn't really matter here. It's when we feel overwhelmed or when we feel threatened, that's when we undergo the stress response. So these stressors typically happen in situations in which we feel like we can't control. Whatever is going on, we feel overwhelmed, there's a lot of anxiety. And then ultimately, the really important part here that I want to drive home is that stress is a natural human response. A lot of times, as a society, we tend to label things good or bad, and stress is neither. Stress is not good, stress is not bad. Stress is a reaction. So at the end of the day, a little bit of stress is actually beneficial for us. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But I really want to drive home the fact that stress is a natural human response, meaning that if we are all in this room and we're all breathing, at the end of the day, we have two different nervous systems within our body. We have our sympathetic nervous system, and we have our parasympathetic nervous system. So I'm not going to dive too deep into the scientific aspect of this. There's not going to be a quiz after this, but I do want you to know the basic function of stress within your body. So let's go over these two different nervous systems. I think they're important in understanding what stress actually looks like, because I'm going to talk about some real ways that you guys can actually implement this decrease of the stress response. So starting off with that first nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system. I remember sympathetic starts with an S. That is in control of your stress response. So your sympathetic nervous system controls that stress. When that is activated, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling stressed out. When your parasympathetic nervous system is activated, I remember P, parasympathetic, peaceful, you feel calm. So typically, we want our parasympathetic nervous system to be activated because that's when we feel peaceful, that's when we feel calm. If our sympathetic nervous system is activated, that's how we know we feel stressed. So there is that distinguishment between those two. Ultimately, if one is activated, the other is not going to become activated. So it's kind of one or the other at one time. And how this works. Let's say we're experiencing something that's really stressful, either something that we're thinking, so a cognition, or something that's actually happening, a life event. Regardless of the stressor, our stress response is the same. So we all experience this same function when we're feeling stressed out. Our sympathetic nervous system becomes activated. We have this function within our body called the sympathetic chain ganglia. Again, terms, you don't necessarily need to know this. What you do need to know is this is a group of neurons that runs from your brain through your core up until about your midsection. And this becomes activated, these neurons become activated, and acetylcholine basically floods our body. Acetylcholine is in charge of muscle function, it's in charge of turning on other functions within our body, and this is the really important part. It turns on other things within our body to help our body flood with adrenaline, epinephrine, and also cortisol. Cortisol is in charge of stress. So these two hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, flood our body. And when we see an increased amount of both of those things, that's how we get stressed out. So I don't expect you guys to be able to conduct labs every day to measure the level of cortisol within your body or adrenaline within your body. That's not how this works. I'm going to talk about some real life things that actually happen to us that really tell us, okay, you're feeling stressed out right now. So we're differentiating these two things. We have cortisol running through our body. We have adrenaline running through our body. We are in fight or flight. So hopefully we've heard of fight or flight before. Fight or flight is essential to surviving. As humans, animals, we all go through fight or flight. When there is a stressor in front of us, whether it is a bear that's going to attack us, or whether it's just a cognition that we think to ourselves, we still experience that same thing. Our brain can't differentiate stressors. It doesn't actually know something that's really scary that we should be scared of, and something else that might not be as scary. We still go through this. So cortisol's running through our body, adrenaline's running through our body. It is preparing us to fight for our lives in that situation, or to run away from the stressor. The problem here is, like I stated earlier, your brain doesn't know if that thing is actually something that is threatening. It just knows this is something that's causing us stress. So fight or flight is really good in the chance that there's a bear in front of us that might be attacking us. It's not really good if our stressor is we have to go to the grocery store and that's really overwhelming, and now our body goes into we have to fight for our lives, right? That's not the chance, not the time in which we should be feeling this fight or flight. So that goes into this concept of acute versus chronic stress. A little bit of fight or flight, a little bit of stress, not a negative thing. It's actually a good thing. It helps us in surviving. That would be acute stress, so that's that short-term stress. Chronic stress is really the problem that we're talking about today. So chronic stress is this idea that we are feeling overwhelmed for a prolonged period of time. So for acute stress, we're talking about a couple hours, maybe a couple days, maybe even a week out of our lifespan in which we're feeling stressed out. If we're talking about chronic stress, we're talking about months to years of chronically feeling on edge. If we go back here, that means in chronic stress, we're in fight or flight for months and years. And that in turn means we're experiencing a lot of cortisol and a lot of adrenaline going on in our body for months and years. And cortisol plays a vital role in a lot of things within our body. It plays a vital role in inflammation. And again, as a society, we tend to put positive and negative connotations on words like inflammation. Inflammation, not a positive or negative thing, it's just a thing that actually helps us in injuries and illnesses. However, if we have too much of a good thing of anything, just like cortisol, if there's too much cortisol in our body for a prolonged period of time, we're going to feel burnt out, we're going to feel overwhelmed. And even more so, we're going to have some problems physically. So here are just some of the physical health problems that we might experience. If we have a prolonged period of chronic stress, we might feel some of these things. So our physical health might take a toll. We see a correlation between feeling stressed out for a long period of time and an increase in all of these physical health diagnoses. The first one being heart disease. There's a strong correlation of when we have too much cortisol built up in our body, we might then be at a higher risk of developing heart disease, high blood pressure, potentially a stroke. We also see a weakened immune system, which makes us more prone to illness. We see things like digestive issues, so things like IBS or ulcers. We also see a change in appetite, a change in weight. Sleep disturbances, so if you've ever been really worried about something that's coming up or really overwhelmed, that might make it difficult for you to sleep. Now experiencing this for months to years obviously is going to impact your sleep. Muscle tension, chronic pain, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then increased risk of other chronic diseases. If we're talking about the consequences not only on our physical health, some of the consequences on our mental health, you can think about the impact of feeling stressed out for a prolonged period of time. You might qualify yourself for an anxiety diagnosis or a depressive diagnosis, depending on how long this is lasting you and the impact of this on your everyday life. We might see memory and concentration issues. So if you're constantly thinking about something, whatever that is, and you're ruminating on it, it's going to be really difficult for you to concentrate on the present. Things like mood swings, irritability, burnout, emotional exhaustion. And then we're going to talk about this also, behavioral consequences. So if we're feeling stressed out for a prolonged period of time, we're probably wanting to stop that feeling. We can do that a variety of ways. We'll be talking about that. Sometimes the ways that we pick aren't the healthiest. Substance abuse, maybe we want to avoid how we're feeling, we want to numb from it. We withdraw because we don't want to cause other people to feel this way, or we just don't enjoy being around the presence of other people. That makes us feel more overwhelmed. And then again, if you have a lot of things on your mind, you're not going to be very present. So you might not perform well at work, at school, in social interactions. Maybe you don't show up the way that you want to as a partner or a sibling. Here's a little infographic basically just showing us some of the consequences on our body if we're feeling this chronic stress. We talked about most of these. Ones that stick out to me that we haven't talked about: a dry mouth. That's actually from fight or flight. Sorry about that. Heart palpitations. We'll talk about that also. We talked about the increased blood pressure, muscle tension, headaches, insomnia. We're going to get into this in just a bit. So again, we talked about how the stress response is a little different from person to person. How you know that your stress is going to look a little different than how your partner is stressed, or your child, or your sibling, or a friend. Typically, though, we see the following. It makes it really hard for us to relax, because there's a lot going on for us in our mind. It makes it really difficult for us to concentrate. We might experience headaches, body pain, trouble sleeping. We talked about the appetite. We talked about the substance use. Ultimately, that last bullet point is really important here. When we see chronic stress, that's usually linked to this notion of it starts to affect our daily life. It starts to affect our ability to show up at work, at school. It starts to affect our own mental health, and it starts to affect the people around us. That's a really good indicator that this stress has gone on for a little too long now. Some of the emotional responses to stress, so I want you to think about that last thing that stressed you out, whatever it may be, and think about how you felt regarding that event. Some people might feel exhausted thinking about that over and over again. Some people might feel confused, sad, anxious. Maybe you feel angry regarding that event, or agitated. Maybe you feel numb because you've thought about this for so long, and at this point there are no feelings attached to it anymore. And then the last one, you might feel physically aroused, and what we mean by that is an increased heart rate. We feel that muscle tension. We feel really fidgety. Maybe we feel like we can't sit still for a prolonged period of time. Here are some common stressful situations. Again, everyone experiences stress due to different stressors. Here are some common stressful situations. The first being health stress. So getting any sort of diagnosis that was unexpected, a personal injury or an illness, possibly a pregnancy, a health-related appointment. These things might cause us to feel stressed out. Then we go to relational stress. So relational stress can be anything that happens in the context of relationships. So if we talk about marriage, that might be stressful for some of us. Divorce might be stressful. The passing of a loved one. Separation, friendships, children, these are all sources of stress. We have occupational stress, so things that might happen within the workplace. We have educational stress, financial stress, so if there's any major changes in our finances, in our bills, if we have debt, that's going to cause some stress. And then those daily stressors that happen, things that are unexpected, that cause us unexpected stress or us to feel overwhelmed. Things like maintaining a home, your physical appearance, sleep, new situations, accidents, or just random responsibilities that might come up. And that takes us to really the main point of today's, I was going to say class, we're not at school, our presentation here today, coping skills. Coping skills are really important for us to utilize. We all utilize them whether we know it or not. However, now is a chance to kind of sit and reflect and ask ourselves, are we using healthy coping skills or are we using unhealthy coping skills? So a coping skill is basically an activity or behavior that we engage in after we feel stressed out. So think again about that last thing that really stressed you out. I want you to think about it for a second, and I want you to ask yourself, what did you do after that stressful event? Did you act on some certain behavior? Did you numb or avoid it? Did you engage in substances to pretend like it wasn't there? Or did you use a healthy coping skill, which we'll talk about in a second? These things can be conscious or unconscious, meaning that you can actively practice these things, or this can be something that you engage in automatically. And these things can also be cognitions or behaviors, so things that we tell ourselves or actual behaviors that we engage in. Well, why do we use coping skills? Why am I even talking about this with you here today? Remember, if we go back to the very beginning, one of the goals that I have as a professional that I find really important is informing the public regarding the role of stress and also what to do with the stress. This is why using healthy coping skills slows down our response time, and it provides us a chance to think of other solutions. Usually, if we think of a solution pretty quickly, it's probably not the best solution for whatever we're talking about, that stressor. So using a coping skill, sitting on it for a little bit, and then asking yourself, okay, now what should I do? That might look a little different. Coping skills activate our parasympathetic nervous system. So that's that peaceful nervous system. Today I'm going to hopefully show you a couple of different techniques that you guys can utilize to activate that parasympathetic nervous system. There's been studies that show that we actually increase our confidence level. Using coping skills reduces depression, anxiety, and stress. So we have unhealthy coping skills and we have healthy coping skills. Here are some unhealthy coping skills. We kind of touched on that just a second ago. They really come back into these three different categories. The first is self-harm. So if something stressful happens, our first reaction might be to blame ourselves for that stressful event. It might be to talk negatively to ourselves. It might be to self-harm physically. Those are all types of self-harm. If we go to that middle, the avoidance. A lot of times when things are difficult, we obviously don't want to experience that difficult thing. So a lot of us choose to avoid difficult things. We avoid thinking about it, we avoid the fact that we feel stressed out, and we push it away. We can do that in a variety of different ways. We can isolate, we can withdraw, we can ignore our feelings, or we can deny that we're even stressed out to begin with. And then our last unhealthy coping skill is abuse, and that's abusing substances or abusing food, whatever it might be. Here are some healthy coping skills that we'll be touching on. The first is distraction. So distraction is a healthy coping skill. It's not the healthiest of coping skills, and I'll talk about why in just a minute. However, it's there for a reason, and we talk about it for a reason. We have emotional awareness, which is a really healthy coping skill that we'll talk about. And then we have that last one, which is self-soothing. So calming down our physical body in the moment when we're feeling stressed out. So distraction is a little different than avoidance. So remember, if something stressful happens and we want to avoid, we'll probably pretend like we don't feel stressed out. We'll do something else instead. We won't pay attention to our feelings. In distraction, we're going to do this, but temporarily. So we're going to distract to create distance from ourselves and the stressor, but then we are going to come back. And we're going to basically address what stressed us out. So we're going to create distance temporarily before returning back to the actual stressor. So avoidance would be that we never come back to the problem. With distraction, we're going to come back to the problem. In dialectical behavioral therapy, also termed DBT, it's one of the therapies that we use for individuals who are chronically stressed out or overwhelmed. We basically have this acronym. It's called the Wise Mind Accepts, ACCEPTS. And that acronym is really important because each letter stands for something different. The first letter, A, stands for activities. So these are things that we can do to be able to distract. We can distract with different activities. This is going to look different from person to person. Maybe your activity is watching a movie. Maybe somebody else's is getting outside and going for a walk. Maybe some individual's activity is hanging out with a friend. This is your choice on what activity you want to utilize. The first C stands for contributing. Research shows us that if we engage in activities that are meaningful and that provide benefit for other individuals' life, we in turn feel really good about ourselves, and we see an increase in serotonin, our happy hormone. So, if we're contributing, we're also distracting from the problem, and that's okay. We're also increasing our serotonin, so we can find volunteer work to do, we can help a family or a friend, we can surprise someone with something nice, we can donate things to a local shelter. Those are just some ways to contribute. The second C stands for comparisons. So a lot of times when we're really stuck in that stress, we feel really overwhelmed. We feel that we're not going to be able to move past this, and our life is going to look like this forever. With comparisons, we basically do something that I tell my patients all the time. When you're very deep into something, you only see that thing. When you ask yourself to zoom out, and you see the larger picture, and you see your lifespan, that moment of stress is all but a dot throughout your lifespan. So taking that step to really pull away, to compare yourself to a different point in time in which you felt something different, hopefully happier, maybe something else was going on in your life back then, that would be comparisons. Continuing on, we have with pushing away. Pretty similar here, we're pushing away from the problem just temporarily. A couple more here. We have with different emotions. So maybe we read an emotional book or we watch an emotional TV show. I will give a disclaimer that for some people this really helps, for some people it does not help. So please choose what actually helps you. Sometimes if we watch an emotional TV show, it might dig us deeper into that hole. So it really depends on your own personal feelings and how you cope with things. And the last two, T stands for thoughts. So counting to 10, working on puzzles, watching a TV show. And S stands for sensations, which we're going to talk more about. Self-soothing, things that we can actually do with our body. That brings us to 2, which is emotional awareness. So we talked a little bit about distracting. Now we're going to talk about after we distract for a little amount of time. Remember, we have to come back to the problem. That is basically what emotional awareness is. We are going to ask ourselves, what do we feel? Why do we feel this thing? And what do we need to be able to move past this? Really simple questions, but these are questions that we don't ask ourselves. So taking that time to really reflect on how we're feeling, why we're feeling it, and what we need to be able to move on is really important. So this involves a couple of things. It involves being very in tune with how you're feeling. And if you're not very in tune, sitting down with yourself for 10 to 15 minutes a day and just asking yourself, how did my day go? What am I feeling right now? What do I need to be able to move forward? These are really important questions. And that leads us to this concept of mindfulness. Maybe we've heard of mindfulness before, maybe we haven't. Mindfulness is your ability to sit in the present right here, right now. It's your ability to focus on what's going on in your head right now for you, to focus on your emotions that you're feeling right now, and to just be present with the moment. I'm going to skip down to this last bullet point. It says Harvard study. So there was a study that was conducted and replicated numerous times by Harvard that basically found that 69% of the time we are not in the present moment. That means that we are thinking about something that's happened in the past. Maybe you guys are thinking about how yummy lunch was just 45 minutes ago. That's still not the present. Maybe we're thinking about something that's going to happen after this. Maybe we're going to go grab coffee. Maybe we're going to celebrate something, whatever it might be. Regardless of what you're thinking, that is not in the here and now, right? What you're hearing, what you're feeling will be in the here and now. 69% of our lives, we're not actually paying attention to what's around us. I find that really sad, that we go through life not actually paying attention to the present moment, but instead focusing on thoughts that might be going through in our head, or something that might occur, or worrying about something that's happened in the past. So mindfulness is this idea that we're actually sitting in the present, with our feelings, with our thoughts. And research shows that all we need is 10 minutes a day to change the way that our brain processes things. 10 minutes of you sitting in a room without distraction. Hopefully we can find that. And just sitting with your thoughts. We can do this a variety of ways. I'll talk about a few different ways that we can implement this. The first is by journaling. You're writing down those thoughts, you're writing down those feelings, and there's a specific study that's cited here. If we do this for 15 minutes a day, for 3 days a week, for around 3 months or so, we actually alter our brain chemistry to being more in the present and to increase serotonin, those happy feelings. Scientifically proven to improve our mood and overall well-being, decrease anxiety, become aware of unhealthy thought patterns, and challenge our thoughts. So journaling is a great way to be able to engage in mindfulness. All you need is 10 minutes a day. But I usually tell my patients is get a notebook, right? A blank notebook, sit down with your notebook for 10 minutes, and just write what's on your mind. Get your phone out if you don't want a notebook. Go into your notes app, right? Type out, how am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling this way? What do I think? That would be journaling. Moving on to a couple different ways that we can engage in mindfulness. Self-soothing. I think this is really important because a lot of times it's really difficult to control our mind with our mind. And really, we talked about the parasympathetic nervous system, we talked about the sympathetic nervous system. So if our sympathetic nervous system is activated and we can't control our thoughts, science has shown that if you tell yourself, hey, just calm down, that doesn't help anything. That actually activates your sympathetic nervous system. So if somebody's in distress around you, you probably shouldn't tell them to calm down either. It's probably not going to help in that moment. So how we can actually do this without using our mind, we can use our body. Remember, there's a lot of things happening within our body when we're feeling stressed out. If you're utilizing these things, you're basically tricking your mind at the end of the day to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So going back into self-soothing, self-soothing is basically this idea that there are different skills that we can use to reduce distress. The first one is the 5-4-3-2-1 method. The 5-4-3-2-1 method really grounds us in the present moment. We talked about how our brain is typically somewhere else. The 5-4-3-2-1 method grounds us in the here and now. So basically what happens is we are shifting all of our senses to instead think about all of the overwhelming thoughts to the things around us. Here's a little infographic of what the 5-4-3-2-1 method is. Basically, we're using numbers and we're using senses. There are 5 things that we can see, and that's what we should be paying attention to. So if we're sitting in a room and we're feeling overwhelmed with a lot of thoughts, I want you to take a second and actually practice this. Look around the room, and I want you to name 5 things that you can see in your mind. You don't have to say it out loud. And when you're looking at these things, I want you to be really descriptive. So if I'm looking around, I see, here's a chair, it's a blue chair with black wheels. And then I'm going to go to the next thing. I see a clock, what is the clock telling me? Then I'm going to go to the next thing, the computer. When you're doing this, it's scientifically impossible to focus on these items around you and also those worried thoughts that you were just thinking. What you're doing is you're grounding yourself in the here and now, and you're pushing away those anxious thoughts. You're then going to move to 4 things that you can touch. So around you, you might feel a chair, you might feel a table. I want you to be, again, very descriptive. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling this? How does it feel? 3 things that you can hear, so I'll wait for just a second. You might be able to hear just small sounds, right? It can be the air conditioning unit, it can be cars going by. 2 things that you can smell, and then 1 thing that you can taste. And the goal here is that you're paying attention to the present moment. You're not paying attention to those worried thoughts that were going on in your head. You're in the here and now, and you just practice your mindfulness for the day. Other techniques are breathing techniques. These are really the ways that you can hijack your nervous system. We've all heard of this, take a deep breath. People tell people this all the time, or we tell ourselves this, but no one actually taught us how to breathe. And I know that sounds really silly because it's an automatic reflex. We know how to breathe for the most part, but do we know how to breathe correctly? So a lot of times when we're feeling stressed out, we breathe into our chest. Those are those really shallow breaths. You'll feel it up here. That's not really conducive to activating our parasympathetic nervous system. That's actually going to activate our stress response. So the shorter your breaths, the more that your sympathetic nervous system is going to become activated. So when we're breathing, we want to breathe into our stomach. When you take your inhale, you should feel your stomach expand. When you take your exhale, you should see it flatten. So that is how we're supposed to actually breathe that's conducive to starting our parasympathetic nervous system. So make sure when you're doing any of these breathing techniques, or even when you're just taking a deep breath, that you're taking your breath through your stomach and not through your chest. This has been scientifically proven to lower your blood pressure, to lower overall stress hormones, to balance levels of oxygen. There's a lot of benefits here. I'm going to walk you through, in the last couple of minutes here together, a couple of different breathing techniques. The first is what we call 4-7-8 breathing. It's the idea that we breathe in for 4 seconds, we hold for 7 seconds, and we exhale for 8 seconds. Scientifically, if we exhale longer than our inhale, we're activating that peaceful parasympathetic nervous system. If you're taking shallow breaths and you're inhaling for longer than you're exhaling, you're going to continue to feel stressed out. So whenever you're breathing, you should exhale longer than you inhale. So for 4, 7, 8, you inhale for only 4 seconds, but you're going to exhale for those 8 seconds. We then have the most important thing. If you take away anything from our talk today, hopefully it's this. It is called the physiological sigh. It's a very long word for a very easy technique. We also call it the deep sigh. So I hope that you take this away from you, because this is one of the most well-researched breathing techniques that are out there that actually activates our parasympathetic nervous system. If you've ever sobbed, and I mean really sobbed, really cried, or if you've ever seen somebody else, especially kids, cry, in the middle of their crying or their sobbing, you'll see them do this thing in which they take really shallow inhales, 2 really shallow inhales, and then they'll take a deep exhale. That is your body's natural response to slowing down. You can do this though when you're not sobbing, when you're not crying, on your own time, and you can activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So all you have to do is take 2 short inhales through your nose, and then exhale through your mouth. And you're basically going to do that a couple times around. 4 to 8 times is basically what you say. If you do this for 4 times, you will yawn right after. And you'll feel that sense of peacefulness come through you probably within the 4 to 8 times. If you do this before bed, it's been shown to improve sleep quality. So all you have to do is take these short inhales through your nose and exhale through your mouth. And repeat it a few times, and you'll feel the sense of calmness. Remember, it's really hard to control your mind with your mind. You don't have to do that. All you have to do is breathe, but you have to breathe correctly. The last couple things I'm going to talk about are really the things that everyone talks about, so I don't want to talk too much about this. We should know this. Somebody has told us this somewhere. If you sleep really well, you'll probably feel better, right? It's a really general term, obviously scientific fact. However, sleep is essential for stress recovery. Your diet plays a critical role in how you feel on a day-to-day basis. You get vitamins from your diet, especially if it's well balanced. And lastly, exercise. Exercise is really important. It triggers positive feelings, serotonin. People don't say these things for no reason. Doctors don't push it, therapists don't push it. People don't tell you to engage in these activities just because they're cool, they're scientific fact, they do work. However, I really want you to take away the breathing exercises from today. Ultimately, the idea here is that stress can overtake your life if you let it, right? You have the ways, a couple different ways that we talked about today, for you to be able to hijack your nervous system and to activate that parasympathetic nervous system so you don't have cortisol running through your body day in and day out. So ultimately, thank you guys for having me. I have a simple QR code. If you want to scan it, you can have access to the whole presentation, lots of different resources here. And that's really all I have for you today. So thank you guys for being here.